Just ahead, there's another edition of the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks and in the Orlando area on Tuff TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm political commentator Al Spry. We have the inimitable Rhodes Cook, a wonderful voice in political analysis, who's going to be joining us today.
Nationally recognized analyst and author of the Rhodes Cook Letter. You can find it at rhodescook.com. You've seen him many times on ABC TV, and you've heard him if you've been a regular listener to this program. So we'll invite you to stay put. The Florida Roundtable begins following these messages. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks and in the Orlando area on Tuff TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
I'm political raconteur and man about town Al Spry. It's great to be here, Reagan, with you on 80 stations across this great state of Florida. Number 3 in population now.
Yeah. Wow.
We have 4 or 5 candidates running for president in this state.
Yeah.
And we're heard on Tuff TV 38, brought to you by our good friend Sue Lupia and, of course, the wonderful Will Strickler, who bring us to you in Tampa and Orlando.
Yeah.
On
right.
Tuff TV 38, Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays at 9 a.m., where you can watch us as well as listen to us, so check it out. It's available through online and also just with good old-fashioned HD antennas. And if you want to get it on your cable or your satellite provider, well, just call them, write them, email them, go to their door and just stand there for a while and kind of, stalk them a little bit and say, I want my Tuff TV. Just kidding about that last part. Reagan. So
Yes.
we have an interesting dilemma here. We have a president who says he's a populist for the people, trying to help the little guy. But yet his big agenda is backing this Trans-Pacific Partnership, this big Asian trade deal.
Yeah.
All you really need to know about it is it's NAFTA, but it's just NAFTA for the Pacific.
Yeah.
So if you liked NAFTA or you liked GATT,
You'll love this one.
and you liked all the jobs that were lost in the United States to these deals, then you're going to really love the TPA and the TPP. And let me tell you, Reagan, this is very interesting because it makes for interesting bedfellows. You have the people in the unions on the left, along with the Tea Party people who both hate this.
Yeah.
And that should kind of tell you something.
I think it's interesting that one of the biggest problems that President Obama has in pushing this thing through is with the members, the Democrat members in the United States Senate who are against this thing. A good chunk of his own party wants nothing to do with it because, just as you have said, they see the jobs flying out of the country.
It is a job-killing bill, but if you're a globalist who likes global trade and likes free trade globally, yes, this bill will help poor people and lower-class people in other countries become middle class. But the problem is that it will also help diminish the middle class in America even more and our manufacturing base even more. So if you want to see more of the continuation, go ahead and back this bill. But the funny thing is just the denial that the president is in, saying, well, I would never back something that would hurt working Americans. This is one of those bills where right on the face of it is going to hurt working Americans.
Absolutely.
In fact, to the point where there's a Democratic-backed trade adjustment assistance plan on a parallel track, which means, hey, the job you lost, we're going to pay to train you to get another job. Well, how about not taking my job in the first place, Mr. Politician, who knows better all the time? Remember, these politicians think they know the big picture. The American people can't be trusted to handle this very delicate balance of free trade. Well, let me tell you something. You can have both. You can have free trade, and you can also have some protective tariffs to help the working people of America stay productive.
We'll see how long this one drags on. I was thinking back, you mentioned NAFTA, obviously, and that became a campaign issue in 1992. between Bush 41 and Bill Clinton.
And don't forget Perot. Right?
Well, Clinton and Bush were both in favor of it. So in that regard, in 1992, it didn't matter who you voted for. We were going to get it rammed down our throats, whether we liked it or not. And we'll see how long this one drags on, and if it becomes, I'm guessing it is going to be an issue. Even if the president manages to get it through, I do see it becoming an issue as we head into 2016.
Well, like I say, Reagan, I don't understand why a Democratic president would want a bill like this, just like I didn't understand why Bill Clinton wanted it, except for the fact that there's a lot of money at stake. And that's the only reason that you would have both parties backing something like this.
And they are globalists. There it is. Well, we've got to pause along the network line here. Let us remind you that this is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks, and in the Orlando area on Tuff TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
We will be joined by a great friend of this program, the analyst Rhodes Cook, in a moment. We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And Al, as promised, we are off to Annandale, Virginia, where we are joined by one of the longest-running good friends of this program, nationally recognized political analyst, Rhodes Cook. And what a pleasure it is. Rhodes, welcome back to the Florida Roundtable.
Great to be with you guys again.
You forgot to also mention that he's a hell of a dancer.
That's right.
Rhodes,
mention it. You don't mention it because it's not true. But anyway, okay.
Rhodes, how are you?
Well, I'm doing okay. Thank you. It's spring up here. Azaleas are blooming. Really, probably the greatest time of the year here in Washington, D.C. area.
All right. Hey, and before we get started into all this, RhodesCook.com, it's the Rhodes Cook letter. It is one of the most insightful political analysis diatribes, is that a good word for it, that you're going to find anywhere in this country. So, and I don't say that lightly because, Al and I have been doing this a long time, and so has Rhodes, and we're just proud to have you as a regular guest on the show.
Well, thank you.
All right. Well, let me jump into this. I want to start with a Florida note first. Historically, something that has never happened before in the history of the United States. There's been a couple of Democrats over the years from Florida who thought they would take a stab at the presidency. Most recently, Bob Graham, and we love Senator Graham. He's been here many, many times. He went up to Iowa and got in the primaries, and basically when the Democrats voted in the primary there, they said, Bob Graham who? And that was the end of his presidential campaign. About the same thing happened to Ruben Askew, a few years before that. Now, this year so far, we have 4 residents of Florida who want to be president of the United States. Governor Huckabee doesn't live in Arkansas anymore. He lives in the Florida Panhandle. Dr. Ben Carson lives in West Palm Beach. Senator Marco Rubio lives in West Miami. And, of course, former Governor Jeb Bush in the Miami area. 4 of them, Rhodes. What do you make of all this?
Well, actually, you're telling me information I actually didn't know. I didn't know that Huckabee and Carson, had sunk their roots now in Florida. And, well, you're quite lucky, I would say, in that respect. Certainly for the economy. I don't know how much it means beyond that, except that the Florida primary next year, and I guess it will probably be in early March, near the beginning of the whole process, will be very interesting. You're talking about Bob Graham and Ruben Askew. Those were two. The lightning didn't strike them.
Right.
Under better. They were running at about a time when George McGovern and Jimmy Carter and other dark horses were getting the tap on the shoulder, but unfortunately, certainly Askew. I think Graham might have come a little later. He did, actually. But still, it takes a little luck, too, to make this all work out for a candidate. That your timing has to be right. You have to be right for the base of the party, or at least a significant wing of the party, and you have to be running in a year where you kind of line up with the basic themes that are important to the party and also important to the country. So I'm not sure if we know just yet what those are going to be. I think that's one reason we have such a muddled Republican field at this point, which is also very unusual. The Republicans normally have a very orderly nominating process where there's a clear heir apparent, ready to go. And, of course, the heir apparent will be challenged, but the heir apparent usually ends up being nominated, whether it's someone like Mitt Romney or, in a way, John McCain. He was the number 2 in 2000. Mitt Romney was the number 2 in 2000.
Yeah, but I would make the guess that the heir apparent more or less is Jeb Bush at this point.
Yeah, I don't know if there is any heir apparent this time around.
I don't know if you could say heir apparent. Maybe maybe you could say the man getting the most press right now. Maybe perhaps.
I think he would be the closest to being, the heir apparent, if we want to continue using that phrase right now. Though he wasn't a number 2 the last time. He was more like his brother. He's kind of a legacy candidate. His brother, just jumped in 2000 and won the nomination, and he hadn't run before in the one that he was positioned. But he was a strong legacy candidate coming from a strong political family like that. And Jeb is probably, another legacy candidate in that way, coming again from the Bush family and having that imprimatur, going for him. And still, if you're down at 15% in the poll, that's far different than George W. Bush was. At a similar point of the 2000 campaign, he was up around 50% or so, in the Republican presidential polls at this point. So it's a much more daunting field, I would say, that Jeb Bush has to navigate. And, of course, Marco Rubio, who knows? He may be the one that feels the tap on the shoulder. He seems to have gotten off to a good start since his announcement. And the whole idea of turning a page, particularly in contrast to Hillary Clinton, who will be nearing 70, and during this election cycle. Marco Rubio, I think, will be 44 later this month. I mean, he's Kennedy-esque in that way. Who knows? He might be the one out of this muddled field who, ultimately prevails. But it's very interesting. It's a very interesting situation.
And we don't even know who else is going to be.
Side.
Yeah, and we don't even know who else is going to be entering. So, but right now, I think Rubio has a nice shot. He is a man who has a populist message that seems to resonate with folks. I think there's some fatigue with the Bush and the Clinton name, so I don't know how far. But if they, it's like when we interviewed Ron Paul. I think a lot of times the candidate has already been, like you said, tapped, and that's where all the money flows, and that's where the press flows, and then they win, and then they win again. So I think there's a certain amount of pre-decision here, if you will, on these big races. It's very hard for a candidate to just come out of the blue, Reagan.
Well, I would agree with that, and it was interesting just within the last couple of days. The latest polling out of New Hampshire has shown that Rubio is and former Governor Bush are tied now, and they're both in double digits. Rubio has come up, but Bush has dropped some, and there are so many of them, and we tend to forget, and people overlook Mike Huckabee. But you have to go back a few years. You remember he won the Iowa primary. Early on in the primary season, he did very well. But it was the narrow scope, the narrow focus of his message didn't resonate with a broader scope in the GOP. To carry him along. So I don't, I wouldn't write him out of the picture too fast. But I think the early primaries are going to tell us a lot.
He'll get the Christian conservative vote, obviously,
yeah.
but like you said, his message is not broad enough to take him through the rest of the primaries and the general election. I think Rubio can have a broad message. I think Jeb Bush can have a broad message. Ben Carson is also more of a Tea Party guy, so his message is more limited as well. And right now in Florida, we got the big guys. I don't think we're having anybody else run though.
And I want you to smile when I say this.
I'm smiling already.
Florida has a fifth possible who owns a mansion in West Palm Beach.
You're talking about the guy with the hair,
Donald Trump. He's dropping hints, and so we could have five.
Could have five.
Wow.
We could have five. What would you think of that candidacy, Rhodes?
Donald Trump? Well, it's easy to snicker at Donald Trump, but if you look at this time 4 years ago, when he was going around the country a bit and acting like he might run, the Gallup poll showed that the two front runners at that point were Mike Huckabee and Donald Trump.
There you go. You never know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with 16%, and the ultimate nominee, Mitt Romney, had 13% at that point. But it was a race kind of like this one, really. We can look to the last one a bit for parallels. In that it was a muddle back in 2011 at this time. And, of course, Huckabee and Trump took themselves out of the race, or never got in, I should say. But both of them were polling pretty well.
But I the reason why there's a little lack of faith in a candidacy is I think Donald Trump just likes to see his name in the press. I don't think he has any intention of ever going the distance in a run. You know what I mean?
I would agree. I would be surprised if he ran, but I wouldn't be surprised if any of the other people who are on the list of grand mentions, actually get into this race, and that you have, a field of more than a dozen significant candidates, maybe up into the mid-teens. At least going forward toward the end of the year. Now, we could have several drop out even before Iowa, and several drop out after Iowa, and that's how it normally wins. Normally, historically, the nominee has to win either Iowa or New Hampshire. The only exception to that was Bill Clinton back in 1992, and actually, the way he came back in New Hampshire, after his problems with adultery and the draft and things of that nature, and finishing second was actually something he could parlay into a moral victory, which he did. It's very successfully. Yeah. So basically there is that rule of thumb, basically, that the eventual nominee has to win one or the other, Iowa or New Hampshire. So that will tell a lot.
Rhodes, we've got to jump in here and take a break along our network line, but let us remind folks that they are listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks, and in the Orlando area, we're seen 3 times a week on Tuff TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day, national political analyst Rhodes Cook. Check it out at rhodescook.com. We'll be back in a moment. From Pensacola to Key West and all points in between, you're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks, and in the Orlando area, we're seen 3 times a week on Tuff TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day is a good friend of the program, Rhodes Cook, editor of the Rhodes Cook Letter. Check it out at rhodescook.com. We think that you will want to subscribe to this if you are, and we know many of our listeners are political junkies. You will will find some of the finest information available anywhere in the United States, authored by Rhodes Cook. And Rhodes, we really are delighted to have you with us this day. Al suggested while we were in the break there that we turn the coin over here a little bit and take a look at what is we've hashed and rehashed the Republicans now early in this early going. Let us have a look at the Democrats. Hillary Clinton supposedly way out front there, but Bernie Sanders has thrown his hat in the ring. So, what are you making of what's going on over there?
Well, it's a very unusual situation, I think, for the Democrats because they're in a reverse.
Hey, why don't we just stop real quick? Maybe do something with the doggy because it's a little.
Yeah, the dog has gone berserk here. Just hang on, just something. Rufus.
I know. As soon as we mentioned Hillary, the dogs went crazy. Maybe we should skip Hillary.
Rufus, hush.
Rufus, I like that name.
Now you stop that. Yeah, I'm manning the store here alone at the moment.
I gotcha.
And we have a golden retriever who occasionally acts like a guard dog, usually when there's nothing going on, and he seemed to have picked that moment to kind of earn his keep.
Go on duty, yeah.
All right. Well, let's just roll from the beginning. Real quick.
We'll just start
Okay. Let's shut him up.
All right, here we go.
From Pensacola to Key West and all points in between, you're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks, and in the Orlando area, we're seen 3 times a week on Tuff TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And our very special guest this day is a gentleman we are privileged to call friend, longtime associate of this program, political analyst Rhodes Cook. Check it out at rhodescook.com. He's got a newsletter that is just chock full of some of the most dependable political information you're going to find anywhere in the United States. You become a fan. Al and I certainly have. And Rhodes, we're delighted to have you with us this day. We spent that first segment rehashing, observing what's going on in the GOP right now in this early presidential going. So Al had suggested let's flip the coin over here and take a look at the Democrats.
First off, I wanted to ask you, how long has it been since you've been coming on this show, Rhodes, approximately? Because it's been a while, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I would say at least, maybe at least a dozen years, it feels like.
I think
maybe a little longer than that.
You and I first became acquainted at UCF in some forums there a long time ago. We had some lunches. And
the early aughts.
Yeah.
Here. Yes, over at the Lou Fry Institute, and I think it's spread from there, into the golden era of radio.
I agree. Okay. The golden voices in the golden era.
Well, we're proud to have you.
It's great to have you on, and wanted to ask you about Hillary Clinton. She's getting a slight bit of competition. She is, of course, the anointed on the Democratic side. That's pretty much without a doubt. Bernie Sanders jumping into the race, the socialist candidate from Vermont, and that's a pretty interesting thing. It seems like the Democrats are not as happy, and neither are the Republicans, it seems, with the moderate voices. They want the more extreme voices, I guess, or right-wing, left-wing voices, how you would put the true believers, we can also say. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would think the passion within each party, comes from either the right side in the Republican Party or the left side in the Democratic Party. And so you have this passion, there to fuel Bernie Sanders' candidacy. I don't think it's enough to, seriously threaten Hillary Clinton, certainly at this point. I think if Hillary Clinton were to lose the Democratic nomination at this point, it would be because she would have to lose it. I don't think it's anyone else winning it. I think they're so far behind, and then they'll be outraised, out-networked, probably to a degree out-organized, and it's hers to lose. Now, it's a question if she could lose, and I think that might be maybe the topic for debate over the next few months, is the baggage that she has and that kind of keeps coming out. Isn't enough to ultimately sink her candidacy, or is it such a thing that she's kind of basically inoculated to it because she's basically so well known?
And she's been around for so long, and stuff has come out previously, and it's never really damaged her brand. Reagan?
At the risk of getting shot here, I'm going to say this anyways. Not a whole. I heard somebody say this. Not a whole lot of people know about Bernie Sanders' philosophy,
right?
And his ideas and where he stands. But millions of people love his chicken.
That's right. He was a colonel in the, I think it was the Army. No.
Is that my editorial comment on our educational system today?
Yeah. Well, it kind of reminds me, of Gene McCarthy, when he ran against Lyndon Johnson, back in 1968. And very few people who voted in the early states for Gene McCarthy actually knew who he was. Some people thought he was Joe McCarthy, related to...
Which is the total opposite, yes.
Total opposite, but in any way, I think, when you have such a one-sided race, as we do right now on the Democratic side, that the other candidates, or the other candidate at this point in time, kind of acts as much as anything as a none-of-the-above option. You don't have to know all that much about him. If you have hesitation about Hillary, you would probably vote for Sanders, because there isn't a none-of-the-above option.
Well, yeah, but I will say this. I do believe there'll be other candidates entering the race on the Democratic side.
Yeah, I would agree. And though nobody mentions it, Joe Biden hasn't finally decided, what he's going to do. He says he'll decide in late summer. Now, he might be the ultimate standby equipment if something happens to Hillary, if Hillary implodes for some reason. But because these other people have a lot of stature building to do, the other potential Democratic candidates that are mentioned, the Martin O'Malleys of the world, they have to kind of, they're far back in building stature and name identification and the gravitas, whatever. And no matter what you think of Joe Biden, he basically has this after nearly a lifetime in politics and the vice presidency now. It used to be the vice presidency was the best launching pad you could have.
Sure.
To the White House. And that kind of defined the nominating process in the late 20th century. More often than not, a sitting vice president was the one with the inside track and was the one who was ultimately nominated and sometimes elected.
Well, why do you think that isn't the case anymore?
Well, I think we've gotten away with it. The last sitting vice president to be nominated is Al Gore. Back in 2000. Of course, Dick Cheney didn't want it. He said he wasn't going to run for president. So,
well, he ended up kind of being a de facto in some ways, anyway.
If you could say yes, he had his 2 terms.
I say he was. I say he was the most powerful vice president we've ever had. To tell you the truth.
But Biden would. I think if Biden were maybe 10 years younger, he would probably be a more formidable force. He's in his early 70s already. I think his age is probably the main hurdle, but that has not stopped some other candidates in the past.
Well, and it hasn't stopped Hillary. Hillary's no spring chicken either. She's about 70.
There's about a 5 or 6 year gap between them. It's not. It's kind of what you think of that fight. The strength of somebody in their late 60s as opposed to somebody approaching their mid 70s to start a first term. So.
Well, what do you think? What do you think is driving this inevitability angle on Hillary? Is it just because of purely the name recognition, and people think we should have a female president, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a good question. Because it could be, and I think there's some of that. I mean, she does have an historic side to her candidacy, just like Obama did back in 2008. His historic nature was racial. Hers would be gender-based. She's a known quantity. Many people think she's a tough cookie.
Mm-hmm. She is.
That she would be a strong leader, like her or not. Maybe some people might say a Golda Meir type. Mm-hmm. So that there is a plausibility there. To seeing her as president. She's well connected. They know how to raise money, obviously, and the Clintons. She's won once before in a race that could have gone either way, really, the 2008 race. It's basically a dead heat.
Well, what I think is amazing about the Clintons is that I don't know, he has such a likability about Bill especially, even I think more than Hillary, but you can't cut Hillary. You got to give her some credit as well. But I think Bill Clinton could murder somebody, and I don't think it would damage him or her brand. I think that they can get away with just about anything. I've never seen a political force like Bill and Hillary. I think that you see the things that have been thrown at them over the years, and they just shrug them off. You see, during his presidency, I thought some of his decisions turned out to be horrendous, like NAFTA and the Glass-Steagall getting rid of that, which led to 2008 crash. But he just keeps bouncing back.
And don't forget, don't ask, don't tell, and a whole raft of other things that that Obama has undone that were done by him 20 years ago. Gentlemen, once again, we are at that point where we need to take a little bit of a pause along our network line here. Let us remind folks that they are listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks. In the Orlando area, we're seen 3 times a week, Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday morning at 9 on Tuff TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day is nationally recognized political analyst Rhodes Cook, and we'll continue our conversation following these messages. We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks, and in the Orlando area of Tuff TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day is political analyst Rhodes Cook. Check out his newsletter at rhodescook.com. We think you'll be duly impressed. Al and I have been over these many years, and that you'll want to become a subscriber. We've seen him on television, and we're always delighted to have him with us. And Rhodes, again, I say thank you for being with us today.
You're quite welcome. I'm enjoying it.
Well, a number of shows back, we got to talking about the historical sweep of things, and you presented a historical notion that I use in my lectures at the University of Central Florida, and that is the notion that the country, after 8 years, historically pretty much, especially in the 20th century, gets tired of the party. The exceptions being Franklin Roosevelt and Ronald Reagan being able to push Bush 41 into office. Pretty much the rule has been 8 years and out. They say it's time for a change. We're on the wrong track at the end of 8 years. Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, that's right. It's, if you go back, particularly to the end of the New Deal era with Truman's presidency giving way to Eisenhower's back in 1952, as you mentioned, we've only had one time when a party went beyond eight years in the White House. That being the Reagan and the Bush 1 years. And then we've had just one time where a party got less than 8 years, and that was Jimmy Carter in the late 1970s. So I think there is a pattern here that the Democrats are working against in 2016. That there is something of a fatigue with the ruling party, the party in the White House. The thing, though, two mitigating factors here, though, is that the Republican brand is questionable. Second, I think that the Obama presidency is really, in terms of, it was pretty steady in terms of the polls. It didn't have the big highs or big lows that George W. Bush did. He didn't have that crisis to elevate him high in the polls, but he got away from any of the things that would sink you down way below the 40% mark. So the Democrats are not moving from a bad base here in terms of their incumbent president. The economy is looking better. Things like so. It'll be a very good test, I think, if this pattern will hold in 2016. The history is there. The history is working against the Democrats, but there could be some mitigating factors that cancel out this something of a rule of thumb, that we
I agree with you there. I on that angle, I think that rule of thumbs in this day and age it's hard to hold to them because of the technological changes that have occurred in the last decade and the changes in society itself. And like you said, the Democratic brand is just going along. There isn't like at the end of the Bush term, what was he at 20-something percent, 27% or something like that?
Yeah, getting way down there.
And you don't see that. You don't see any high highs, but any low lows with Obama. So
no, he's been steady Eddie.
What do you think, Reagan?
Well, I think that's absolutely right, and that is, the big swings in public opinion haven't been there. At the moment, a small majority of people who are polling are saying that the country is on the wrong track. And the last I saw was around 57%, but that's about as far as it's gone. We're not talking 65, 70, 75% of the people saying.
Yeah, and we seem to be in an era, too, where the national map seems kind of stuck. That there aren't any big changes, wholesale changes, where you might have 10 states flip-flopping, from one party to the other, from election to election. It's generally around 2 or 3, each election that change. Something would have to happen to get us off of this kind of a stuckness, that we have with the map. It didn't used to be that way. A generation ago, you'd have landslides one way, you'd have landslides the other way, you'd have, some mismatches in between, and you'd have, 20, 30 states sometimes shift between one election or another. But now we're talking small ball, a small map, in terms of just a small number of battleground states. Now, it'll be interesting to see if that, again, holds, whether we're still in this era, a fairly evenly divided map with a little bit of a Democratic tilt at the presidential level and a Republican tilt at the congressional level, or whether something will happen between now and the election to shake us up and move us into another political era. But I think that's going to be something to watch, in the months ahead. And of course, I think you have to take into account, will something happen by 2016 that will stir or create that always intriguing third-party candidacy or independent candidacy that happens every decade or two, to roil the landscape.
There we go.
So
Rhodes.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Interesting time.
Always a pleasure to have you with us. The comments are insightful, and we're hoping that as we go through this political season, that we can get you back in here several times again between now and Election Day on 2016. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Again, Rhodes, thank you so very much for being with us this day.
You're quite welcome. Always a pleasure.
Check him out at rhodescook.com, and Al and I will be back with a brief closing thought following these messages. This is the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks, and in the Orlando area, we're seen on Tuff TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Always a pleasure to have Rhodes Cook with us, and it is no kidding. We have been privileged to call him friend over many, many years on this program.
He's a wonderful guy and a great friend of the show, and a really insightful and great mind as far as the political scene goes. So it's always great to have him on.
Yeah.
This is very interesting. The Christian share of the U.S. population has plunged. The fastest growing religious group in the U.S. is, Reagan, none of the above.
Really? Wow.
Of the last decade, more have begun to identify themselves as unaffiliated and to a lesser extent with non-Christian faiths, according to a new, massive Pew Research Center survey that was released last week. The drop, while most pronounced among young adults, is happening across age, regional, ethnic, and racial groups. The number of Americans who identify as Christian has dropped almost 8 percentage points in 7 years, from 78.4% to 70.6%. And, you know, I want to kind of take a guess at why that is. As a Christian guy, I think a lot of churches have, one, become staid, number two, become too in line with politics. I think that there is, I think that there's an inflexibility in the religion now. I don't think that there's enough Jesus. I think there's more. I think it's just more of the. How should I put it? I guess the organized religion is just too stoic, like it's too staid. Do you know what I mean, Reagan?
And I think that we're also seeing a part of a historic swing here too. We have noticed over the decades, Christianity goes up and down, and we are currently in one of those decline positions. I would hazard to say that there is no real dynamic national Christian voice out there.
Joel Osteen would be the one.
Yeah, and the only one, because, you know, a number of years ago, love him or hate him, you had people like Jerry Falwell, Billy Graham. They were out there. Billy Graham, arguably the most recognized face in the history of the world.
Yes.
And there's nobody on the scene doing that kind of thing today. Well, all right, we've got to call a halt here. We thank you for your time. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
We'll be back next week with another Roundtable.
You've been listening to Florida Roundtable, a weekly look at issues and problems of concern to Floridians from a state, national, and international perspective. Presented by the Florida News Network, with your hosts, Reagan Smith and Al Spry. The views and opinions expressed during the preceding program are solely those of the participants and not necessarily those of this station's ownership, management, or sponsors of FNN. Your views and opinions are welcome. Address your card or letter to Florida Roundtable, in care of Reagan Smith, 2500 Maitland Center Parkway, Suite 407, Maitland, Florida, 32751. Or you may email reagansmith@fnnonline.com. Thank you for listening, and please join us again next week for another edition of Florida Roundtable.